The clacking of the tracks was making one sleepy. The last few days had been very exhausting for all of us. It was a hustle and bustle until we had our wheel parts and our tanks together and could finally start loading the trains. Even though the weeks before were marked less by fighting than by waiting, we were able to assist our allies here in Hungary with our regiment and with the whole division. Now we were rushing back to France. Like me, many thought we would continue to the east, but we were all mistaken. After all the drills and various maneuvers at division level, my crew and I were now a well-coordinated team and were looking forward to the first clash. We didn't know what was coming, and whether we might experience further training stages in the west. There were rumors that the English and Americans wanted to go from England to France. So, a large-scale landing on the French coast. Was it a good idea? During our training time, we had driven to the Atlantic Wall a few times and looked at the huge bunker facilities and gun positions. Truly impressive buildings that would stop any enemy far off the coast. The motto there always was, "No one gets across." This reminded me of the motto of the Maginot Line. "One ne passe, no one gets through." And yet, the French were overcome in a short time, in 1940, and the Maginot Line was no obstacle for our troops. My men were good people. Two old hares from the Eastern Campaign, Sergeant Kurt F. and Sergeant Helmut G., driver and gunner in my tank. Then the Corporal Fritz N. as the radio operator, and Corporal Hans F. as a loader. All four wanted to prove themselves, and I too wanted to finally lead the Panther into battle. But our time had not come yet. Even in Hungary, we had not fired a shot, but it showed that we would work well together as a platoon in the company. There were also losses in Hungary, but that was part of it. Surely there would be more. But I didn't want to think about that now. I had also finally received news that Rudolf, my old gunner, was also supposed to join our unit. That was finally some good news. I was in my unit with some other commanders, and we still discussed the current war situation. Even here, you could still feel the fire of the armored hussars. Everyone was confident that we, with the division, no matter where we were positioned, would not fail as a thorn in the enemy's side, or as a bulwark against the red tide. Some even went as far as to say that with a new weapon, and with what was still being developed in the laboratories, we would regain control and determine the action. I was torn back and forth. Since the time in the East and the hard blows against our army group, it was clear to me that the Russian cannot be defeated like this. An impenetrable defense front, at which he would bleed to death. That would be one way to stop the eternal retreats. But apparently, Ivan always finds a loophole through which he comes through to then threaten the flanks. The units would then have to be tactically withdrawn. Here in the west, it is still quiet. In the south, it doesn't look rosy either. There, they still have the terrain advantage. But that is also only a fixed size on paper, if the enemy flyers are not removed from the equation. I had heard enough and closed my eyes. A few hours of sleep would help. Hours later, I was awakened by a loud squeak. We stopped, and I extracted myself from my sitting position. A bit stiff, I looked out of the window, and we were probably back in France. So, we got some coffee and bread, and the day was not so bad. We could stretch our legs a bit before we moved on. It was quite a sight to see the tanks in line and file on the transport cart. Tomorrow we should be back in our staging area. All platoon leaders were called to the company commander. I was deputy platoon leader and went along. We gathered in a department that had been converted into a map room, The company commander explained the daily routine, or rather, the daily goal, and that we would unload on June 5th, if there were no problems. There was no combat mission yet, but for the regiment it was first important that we brought everything back in one piece, in terms of material and personnel. As we were dismissed, there were small groups, and here and there reports of what the men and crews had experienced. I sat down with Ernst afterwards, and we smoked. Ernst said he had a bad feeling in his stomach. I laughed and said that he never had that. But he became thoughtful and said that we could certainly have difficulties in France. The problems would be an invasion. I brushed off his concerns and said that I wouldn't even make it to the shore. And if, which would have to be with the devil, they do make it, the battle-tested German units would quickly throw them back into the sea. This is not Russia, Peter, Ernst said to me. Here, you have a completely different terrain, and the American is not an enemy like Ivan. Ernst had fought in Africa against the Tommy, and also against the Americans, so he definitely knows what he's talking about. But I argued that the tanks must also be considered. They have nothing that matches our Panzer IVs and Vs, plus the combat experience of our people. This must not be disregarded. Ernst did not respond. He was a burned child. 3 times his tank had already been shot, and each time he just barely got away. The last time was also in retreat in Africa, where his Panzer III was hit by a British Churchill. He had no chance to resist the superior force. When his tank then burned, he could still pull the loader out of the fighting compartment. The radio operator and driver remained in the burning tank. The gunner was also wounded, but he managed to get out himself. Ernst had burned his hands and arms. The loader lost an arm. I think he has not really come to terms with this. He blames himself for not rolling back further. But that's just the way it is. You make a decision, and then fate comes into play. Of course, luck always plays a part too. The train continued, and we had time for ourselves. I wrote a few lines to my mother and hoped that I could go home again for Christmas. The hours passed, and when you just have to wait, you have too much time to think. There was good food, and we hoped that we would get back to our old staging area. A young commander from my platoon came to me and asked for a brief conversation. The lieutenant had hardly any combat experience. Visibly nervous, he took a seat with me and tried not to look at my large scar and my eye injury. I told him he could look closely. Everyone here already knew how it had happened back then, and especially the young comrades should always keep this in mind. So I initially waited for the question he wanted to ask me. It was about his crew, and he believed they did not take him seriously. Well, that's always the way at the beginning. You get the rank, but you have to earn the respect. I advised him to always consult with his gunner. These are usually old hands, and they know the game. The rest of the crew, you have to take as they are. You have to know things about the family, the place of residence, and details of the men to show in conversations that you are interested in their life outside the tank. You should be strict, but not arrogant. Always maintain a good distance, but also make human decisions when necessary. The men want to be led and need a strong hand making decisions. Also, a joke should be made from time to time, but not fool around. We fight and die. A smile can help to drive away the fear. But you're also measured by your willingness to take risks. Caution may be appropriate here and there, but without a certain spirit in the face of the enemy, you cannot assert your position as a superior. The young lieutenant soaked up everything, and I hoped for him that he would find the healthy middle ground. Experience must be gained. For this, one should survive long enough. I think I gave him everything he would need. The rest, he has to do alone. We'll see what time brings. The other commanders usually give the young ones a hard time. But they are never angry or mean. Everyone wants the same. And it only works if we stick together. It's not for nothing that it's called hardened in battle and wielded together. Restless times are coming our way. We knew that. Only the where and the when we could not estimate yet.